Well, thank you very much. So we'll kick off. We've got a great, interesting talk coming up with a couple of really great speakers here, which I'm just going to briefly introduce. So we've got Ayesha Walawalkar, whose record of strategy experience expands across the UK into Asia, working with J. Walter Thompson, BBH, Saatchi, and currently at MullenLowe as heading up their global strategy on Unilever. So she's been really heavily involved in the award-winning Free the Kids campaign for Persil as part of their Dirt is Good brand platform. And then we've also got Steve Harrison, who is a renowned copywriter, creative director and author, who has just recently released his book Can't Sell, Won't Sell, which will kind of centre this conversation on it. And he's going to do a little kind of intro to that in a second. And his career spans, started at O&M, born in Blackpool, spent many years at O&M, and was one of the first judges to head up the direct jury at Cannes. And worked at Wunderman for many, many, many years. So we've got a couple of great people here to talk about this topic, sort of that's been spinning out from the book that you've written, Steve. So I thought it might be interesting just to start the chat, just to give people who maybe not as familiar with the book that you've written, just a bit of an idea about what it's about and what are the kind of key themes that you've been trying to explore through it.
All right, 9 months work in 90 seconds. I'm probably not the only person who feels that Adland has lost the ability and, more importantly, interest in selling, in building brands and selling its clients' products and services. The IPA has called this the crisis of creative effectiveness. There are many reasons, but it's my contention that the main reason lies in our politics. We are now so progressively left-leaning as an industry that we cannot bring ourselves to fuel capitalism's engine of growth and consumption. We tell ourselves that we're not in the business of selling anymore. We found ourselves a new raison d'etre. And as we explain to the people who occupy the middle-class metropolitan bubble with us, we tell them we're not shifting kit anymore. We're using our purpose-driven strategies to save the world. And the problem is that the people who are directing these, we're drifting further and further away. And I think that if advertising really does want to be a force for good in the near future, then it needs to rediscover its commercial purpose.
It's interesting, Ayesha, from your point of view, because obviously the work that you've been involved with has naturally come from that space. So I'm interested to kind of start off, I suppose, with your experience of how those kinds of campaigns have shifted some of those longer or short-term metrics, because obviously you're sat there at the coalface and have taken those decisions to pursue this kind of purpose-led or social benefit-led campaigning. So what kind of evidence are you seeing that you can kind of draw upon that sort of help you feel really confident that's been the right move for you and your brands?
I think first we need to differentiate between what's the brand purpose and what's a social cause, because sometimes brand purpose encapsulates and encompasses social causes and sometimes it doesn't. Now, if I'm Nike, I'm a purpose-driven brand, and I've always stated what my purpose is about. And, in terms of purpose, they actually say that they're about creating an equal playing field for all athletes, and they have a mission to turn everybody into an athlete. And if you've got a body, you're an athlete. So that's something that sustained them and built them as a brand and made them more salient and made them more relevant and more engaging for years and years and years. And once they've done that, they are then picking off specific social causes. They'll create a campaign around Colin Kaepernick. They'll create a campaign around Serena Williams. And that keeps attention going. It keeps people focused on their brand. But their whole brand is not about that. Their brand is purpose-driven. And that purpose is not just about, what we're going to say to people out there. It's also about what gets their people to come to work every day, what sets them apart from Adidas and everybody else. And, in terms of does it drive business? Well, the Persil brand that you mentioned earlier that I've worked on for some years now, That, since it adopted a single proposition, if you like, and they do see it as being a purpose-driven proposition, although arguably that came about before purpose was such a buzzword everywhere. And it was actually a way of differentiating the brand from what everybody else was doing out there, which was talking about how product A washed whiter than product B. And it was a very, very distinctive way of differentiating them that talked about an attitude of a mother towards her kids, and now more about a family and the importance of kids being able to get dirty. That brand has grown tenfold over more than a decade, not 10%, tenfold, as a result of having a really distinctive proposition. And I think that is what purpose can do. It goes above and beyond purely what I can say about a USP and a product point of difference, which is harder and harder to find. And I don't think that's a million miles different from what Stephen is saying. I just think that we tend to conflate those two things. It's got to be about a social cause. Sometimes it starts from somewhere else. It starts from what a brand believes about itself.
It's quite interesting. I was reading about Ben and Jerry's this morning, and obviously another Unilever brand. But, in one sense, dirt is good and personal. They're very, aligned, kind of similar territories, and you feel like there's absolute permission for them to kind of play in that space. How do you sort of feel about a brand like Ben and Jerry's? I mean, essentially, it's ice cream. It's a leisure, a luxury product in some senses for a lot of families globally. And, they've got a long history of playing out political points of view as well as social influencing ideals. How do we sort of navigate as brand owners and marketers, the areas that we can play in and the areas that we shouldn't play in as a brand? I'm just thinking as well about brands like Pepsi, kind of stepped into a very similar point of view, area, a very hot topic, even, for the last however many decades. And got their fingers royally burned. So what's the difference, and how do we manage that as brands and marketers, do you think?
I think so. Ben & Jerry's, a fascinating brand, and it is now owned by Unilever, but it's run very, very independently. And what is that brand all about? It's about the spirit of its two founders, and they are West Coast liberal, love peace and ice cream. That's what they've always been about. That's what they're always going to be about. You don't have to agree with them, but you have to know what they think. That's who they are. And that translates from taking on Priti Patel on Twitter through to what I call my ice creams, what flavors I'm going to have, whether they're going to be vegan and recyclable. It's not for everyone. They're not necessarily trying to talk to a mainstream audience. They are who they are. They've got a really clear sense of who they are. I think what they do have in common, what Persil and Ben & Jerry's do have in common, and what we try very hard to do when we're working with defining purpose for a client is, particularly when you start with Persil, the ladder between what does this brand do functionally? What's it all about? What does it offer you in terms of a product benefit? And what is our brand purpose? And how do we link the two of those? That ladder's got to be incredibly short, incredibly clear, and incredibly simple. Because if someone looks at your work and can't understand what on earth it's got to do with your washing powder, then you're in trouble. And I think that is sometimes where some of the other brands that you've mentioned do get themselves into difficulties.
Steve, I mean, have you kind of experienced that, or have you had any kind of observations from your point of view on is there a guide to how to get it right and how to get it wrong where's the area to play? I mean, we're not saying that all social purpose is wrong, are we? Or are we saying that actually brands should really avoid that territory?
No, absolutely not. I think our industry has a tendency to jump on good ideas and trample them to death. I think that goes back to Russell Reeves's USP. I think it goes to Don Pepper's customer relationship marketing. I don't think I'd put Seth Godin's permission marketing in there personally, because I always thought that was a bad idea. Clue Train Manifesto had the seeds of a good idea. But we take good theories and we trample them to death because we're too lazy to actually put the rigor and the ruthlessness into making them work. And I think if you're ruthless and rigorous enough, you can take good and worthy causes and promote them to commercial gain. And I think that Unilever do this phenomenally well. They align purpose with the product, the positioning, and the proposition. And as I say, they are very, very good at this. Alan Jope famously berated the marketing industry in Cannes in 2019 by saying those who don't have that rigor and don't have that ruthlessness run the risk of further endangering the reputation and the trust of marketing and advertising. And unfortunately, there are far too many lazy and incompetent marketers who see purpose as a quick and easy solution to the complex job of marketing their business. I also think that there's a danger that purpose is also adopted by those who see it as a means of imposing their political views upon a mainstream who don't necessarily share them. And I think in both cases, the incompetent and the opportunist politico, I think what they're doing is ultimately they are annoying and alienating the target audience from whom they should be taking their lead. I admire what Unilever do. I think you are serious about it, and there's a great rigor and ruthlessness when you're whacking the brands that you can't apply a purpose to, and you're putting people out of business and out of work because those brands don't align with your approach to business. That's you're serious, and I respect that.
And do we? I mean, is there any sense that as brands, whether they're lazy or not, are kind of eked into this territory and feel that the need to have a benefit beyond the kind of production and commercialization of their product for society kind of lets governments off the hook? I don't know. What do either of you sort of have a view on that? Surely governments should be taking the role. Governments should be, if brands, there's a great piece by Martin Beagle on this, who kind of talked about whether, brands are market driven, and actually we let the government off if we kind of step into these social causes and territories.
Yeah, I think that we're crazy to abdicate responsibility to brands. Crazy to do so. Let me read you something from someone you will know, I'm sure, Ayesha, and that is Aline Santos, the Executive Vice President of Global Unilever. And she's opinion that a brand's role in culture has never been more important because people expect us to have a point of view. This is the time when you can see businesses and brands as the biggest healers in our society and our planet. We have to take that responsibility. And I would say, no, Unilever, you don't have to take responsibility. You make industrial quantities of soap and margarine. And no, Unilever, people do not expect you to have a point of view. The margarine they buy from you is just below the soap powder on the shopping list and just above the dog food on the shopping list. They don't expect Unilever. They don't look to Unilever to have this point of view. And no, brands are not the biggest healers in our society and in our planet. This is nonsense, but it's actually dangerous now. Because I see this as an unprecedented power grab by the big corporates, by the corporate elites. In the Gilded Age, the robber barons have been rightly denigrated as for the rapacious bastards that they were, but they'd never have had the audacity to attempt a power grab and usurp power in this way.
Early March, the WHO put out a call not just to governments but to corporations and to manufacturers to step up and help provide PPE because there was a massive shortage of it. Within about a week, you had brands like Prada and Armani in northern Italy turning around their factories and turning those into from designer gowns to hospital gowns. Now, that I think changes a little bit the contract between brands and society. We're in a mess right now. It is very, very clear that governments are really struggling, actually, to meet these multiple stresses. This is a financial trauma, this is a social trauma, this is a medical trauma. Frankly, it is all hands to the pump right now. And a lot of brands have pivoted like that and are stepping up in an attempt to help in whatever way that they can, be that branded, be that unbranded. And I think what it does draw attention back to is when the people who normally might be creating stuff for Armani are creating hospital gowns, they take a certain pride in that. And it just reminds you that a brand is not simply something that a rich bloke on a Apple Mac creates. It is also the people who work in the factories, who design that stuff, who make that stuff, who put that stuff out there, and who want to feel proud about what they do and what they are contributing in a time of great crisis for people. So I think when Alini talks about brands are able to heal, brands are able to step in and fill some of the needs there. She's talking about that in part. She's also talking about being able to do the opposite, I think, of some of the things you were talking about, Stephen, which is not just jump on the bandwagon of some of the polarization in our society at the moment, but give people something optimistic that they can start to feel a little bit better about at a time when we're all in a pretty depressed place. And I think that is a role that brands can play.
Can I just pick up on that? Because I think there's a differentiation that we need to draw between doing acts of good for the benefit of society and using them as a marketing tool to gain a closer relationship with an audience with a view to getting them to purchase. And I think some of those examples kind of straddle the subtlety of that. What is a marketing effort with a view to selling a product down the line, and what is purely an act of social, corporate social responsibility? One of the things that one of the themes I wanted to explore was this, I suppose, this argument that as an industry, as marketers and advertising and communications agencies, we're floating away, creating distance between us and the mass mainstream audience, and that the people we are, the backgrounds we come from, the education system we've experienced, the places we live, the people we talk to, our experience means that we are unable to truly empathise with that mass mainstream audience. And there's some interesting research, in the empathy delusion, which says that actually our ability as marketeers to predict what those mainstream audiences are interested in is actually compromised, and we're off by some measure. I'm interested in your experiences of how you, as practical marketeers, are encouraging either your teams or through your experience to remain close and then kind of remove that delusion in empathy and actually get as close as possible to what people think. What are the problems that we're facing as an industry in terms of doing that from your experience?
Well, I think we're facing tremendous problems right at this moment because the way in which we communicate is like this. Having said which, we are, the agency that I work with is fortunate, I suppose, in some ways, in that we have a lot of mass and mainstream communication because we handle the NHS recruitment work, we handle a lot of mainstream FMCG brands, but also a lot of work for the government. So, we're looking at the Brexit transition and COVID and so on, and there's an almost ongoing, constant stream of qualitative work that is going on around the country with a constant temperature check of how people are feeling about the current situation. And our job is to make sure that that gets fed back into the rest of the agency so that we are aware of how people are feeling around the country at any given time. The challenge, of course, is that you're doing it in this environment, and that's very different. And I think one of the things you pointed out in your book, Stephen, is that, there is a difference between what people say in a focus group, and actually there's a difference between what they do on Twitter versus what they do in a focus group. And that's probably different, again, from some of the things that they're feeling and doing in real life. That's something that we have to try and navigate. And it's been that way for a little while. I think what we miss is some of the stuff that we used to do. And actually, what FMCG brands like Unilever have historically been very good at doing, which is, just sitting in people's homes and sitting there in their kitchen and their sitting room and so on, and getting a bit of a real feel for what a role a brand really plays in their life when we are talking about a stock cube or a tea bag and so on. Sitting there in someone's front room and understanding where all of that fits, it's hard to get that level of understanding and empathy on the other side of a screen. And so hopefully this won't last forever, but we will keep working at it any which way we can in the meantime.
And Stephen, you made a really interesting point about training and proposition writing, the kind of nuts and bolts of a strategist's learning curve, I suppose. And do you want to expand a little bit more on your sort of perception, I suppose, of what we've lost in terms of the way that young marketing strategists are kind of brought into the field at the moment?
One aspect of it is what we hold up as admirable and exemplary. And I looked at the new blood or blue blood work that D&AD were doing recently, and the top 20 winners of them, 20 of those winners, 17 of the 20 were all purpose-driven ideas. There were only 3 of those ideas that had anything to do with it, which might have resulted in somebody taking their credit card out and actually purchasing something. And I think that goes all the way to the top. I think that 2019's major award winners, the top 10 major award winners, 6 of those were purpose-driven. Only 4 of them were again, the primary objective, or even an objective, might have been to get someone to buy something that somebody had made in a factory, or buy something that had been made by somebody who was employed by somebody to make something. And so I think there's a general, we've drifted away from the nuts and bolts of producing briefs and producing creative work, which says to somebody that my brand can be useful in your life because it will do this for it. Your life will be better with this product or service in your life. It will make it easier. It will make it better. It will make it more respected. It will make you, and we've lost interest in doing that. And I don't know why, but I ascribe it to our politics, in that we don't see any value in that anymore, because consciously or unconsciously, we cannot bring ourselves to persuade people to consume.
Echo there. So just to round off the conversation, I just wondered whether there was a piece of advice, I suppose, that you, from your kind of perspective, your experience, would put out there in terms of, a watch out or an opportunity for a marketer or a young strategist to take on board, who's working at that coalface and they're trying to find something to say about a product or a brand to kind of create an audience engagement. What are the kind of pieces of advice, I suppose, that you could provide based on your experience and point of view and this discussion?
Fundamentally, we are not in any kind of disagreement that our work needs to move the needle for our clients. And if it doesn't, if we are not fulfilling the objectives that our clients are setting in terms of penetration growth, salience growth, trial, whichever it might be, that will not be a long-lived relationship. I think our job as strategists is to find what it is about a wider array of things now, what it is about what the brand has to say, what it is about product has to offer, what it is about how this will play a role in your life, and crystallize that. Purpose is very, very popular at the moment. Not everybody does it well. It's not a panacea, but it is one of the tools that we have to play with now.
Steve, do you have a piece of advice that you'd like to add to that?
Well, on the subject of when I wrote the book, I was expecting a shitstorm. I really was, of criticism, but I've been, I must say, pleasantly surprised. Quite simply, the problem is you can build a career, raise your profile, and have a brand, your own personal brand, by tweeting the right things, speaking on the right platforms. It's a lot easier to do that now than it is to win an IPA Effectiveness Award. And I think that I think I would like people to start making the argument for some kind of revision of that. And I hope that my book might start that discussion, because I think it definitely needs to be had.
So thanks very much for that. Really, I mean, we could talk for an hour, couldn't we? And more. We'd probably need a glass of wine for that. I suppose my key takeout from what we've discussed is that certainly kind of social cause-led marketing is a strategy, but it's not the only strategy. And I think as planners and marketers, we are beholden to those business and behavioural KPIs. And if we keep those things in mind, we won't go too far wrong. So thank you very much, guys. And that's it.
Thank you, Ayesha.
Thank you.